In early 1895, Oscar Wilde stood near the peak of his success in London. He wrote plays that filled theatres and drew attention wherever he went. His name meant wit, style, and sharp talk about society's rules. But that same society also demanded obedience to its moral code. Fame did not protect him from it. It made him easier to watch, easier to judge, and harder to forgive. Victorian England treated certain private acts between men as crimes, even when they happened out of sight. The law stayed ready in the background, and it worked best when paired with rumour. Wilde moved in circles where gossip travelled fast and carried real consequences. His closeness with Lord Alfred Douglas, a young aristocrat, became a known point of talk. Each meeting and message added weight to what others already suspected. As Wilde's public work gained more admirers, the private talk around him grew sharper and more organised. Friends warned him, and enemies listened. Some saw his art as proof of charm and intelligence. Others treated it like a sign of corruption. The danger came quietly at first, through whispers and social pressure, then through the sense that someone might act. By the start of 1895, the gap between applause and punishment narrowed. The pressure on Wilde stopped being private when one man decided to make it personal. The Marquis of Queensberry, Lord Alfred Douglas's father, treated the relationship as an attack on his family name. His hostility escalated step by step, first through angry messages and interruptions, then through louder, more public attempts to force a break. Queensberry did not just disapprove, he pursued Wilde as if he needed to be punished. Queensberry's campaign relied on one idea: that scandal, spoken out loud, could do what warnings could not. He pushed the accusation into places where it could not be ignored, turning gossip into a threat with consequences. In Victorian London, reputation acted like a kind of currency, and losing it meant losing work, friends, and protection. Each time Queensberry raised the charge, the risk to Wilde's public life became more immediate. Then came the moment designed to force a decision. Queensberry left a calling card for Wilde with a blunt public accusation written on it, wording that carried the clear meaning of sexual wrongdoing. It was simple, and it was dangerous. The insult sat in writing, ready to be repeated, shown and used. Wilde and the people around him faced a hard choice: absorb the attack in silence or answer it with the law. Wilde faced a choice that sounded simple and proved dangerous. He could absorb Queensberry's public accusation and let it fade into gossip, or he could fight back and demand a legal verdict. He chose the courtroom. By suing for criminal libel, Wilde aimed to force Queensberry to justify the claim in front of a judge and jury. It turned insult into an official charge. It also turned Wilde's own life into evidence. A criminal libel case did not just ask whether the words looked hateful, it asked whether they were true. That rule changed everything. Once Wilde filed, Queensberry did not need to prove malice, he needed to prove justification. And in Victorian law, that meant digging into the most private parts of Wilde's conduct. Lawyers prepared to question not literature, not reputation, but relationships. For the first time, Wilde's private world moved toward oath and cross-examination. Wilde entered the fight believing wit and status could hold the line. He expected that the law would protect him from a public smear, but the act of suing handed Queensberry a weapon: the right to investigate, to subpoena, to assemble stories into a case. The conflict left the drawing rooms and hit the machinery of justice. From that point, the question stopped being what people whispered. The question became what could be proved. Queensberry's lawyers did not defend the insult by arguing Wilde felt offended. They defended it by trying to prove it was true. That choice changed everything. The court did not stay on the question of a calling card or a wounded reputation. It moved straight into Wilde's private life. Names appeared. Addresses appeared. Men were brought forward who claimed they had known him, met him, been invited, been paid. The defense built a pattern, step by step, meant to look like proof rather than rumor. They produced letters, stories of introductions, and accounts of evenings that sounded ordinary until the meaning turned. Witnesses were used to suggest a chain of pursuit and reward. What had been whispered in clubs now sat in a public record. And because this was a libel case, Queensberry's side did not need perfection. They needed believability. Then Wilde took the stand, and the danger deepened. Under questioning, his wit and confidence did not land as charm, it landed as evasion. His own words about art, beauty, and friendship were pulled into a harsher frame, as if they were codes for vice. The courtroom stopped treating him as a celebrated author with daring ideas. It treated him as a man whose character itself stood on trial. The libel case reached a moment where the danger became obvious. Queensberry's lawyers did not merely defend their client. They built a case against Wilde himself. Wilde's side now faced a choice: keep fighting and risk far worse, or stop the action immediately. He dropped it. In legal terms, that meant Queensberry effectively walked free. In human terms, it meant Wilde lost control of the story. The collapse came at once. The state stepped in and treated what had surfaced in court as grounds for prosecution. Wilde went from the man who had accused someone else to a suspect in his own right. He got arrested for gross indecency, a broad charge used to punish sexual acts between men. The shift was brutal. One day he used the courts as a shield. The next, the courts turned into a weapon. From that point, the damage spread beyond the law. Arrest meant scandal, and scandal moved faster than facts. His reputation, built over years of success, started falling apart in public view. Work that depended on approval and respect began to look fragile. Friends and supporters had to calculate their own risk. Wilde now faced a criminal case, and he faced it while watching his career and status begin to vanish in real time. The first criminal trial began with Wilde no longer in control of the story. Newspapers treated the case as a spectacle, and the tone turned openly hostile. Reports did not simply describe charges, they judged his character. That mattered, because public opinion pressed in on every witness and every juror. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution aimed to turn suspicion into certainty, using his own public persona as part of the case. Prosecutors did not rely only on direct accusations. They picked through letters and phrases, arguing that coded language proved intent. They pointed to his writing, his ideas about beauty, and the kind of friendships he described, insisting that art and private feeling hid criminal acts. Male intimacy, even without clear proof of specific moments, became the center of the argument. The trial became less about what happened and more about what Wilde seemed to represent. Day by day, the case tightened around interpretation. What words meant, what affection implied, what a certain style of life suggested. Wilde's defense tried to hold the line between expression and crime, but the accusation kept sliding back into moral outrage. In the end, the jury could not reach a single verdict. The result was a hung jury. For a moment, Wilde's fate stayed undecided, suspended between ruin and escape. The second trial came fast, and the mood hardened. After the hung jury, there was no relief, only a warning of what came next. The state pressed forward with more determination, and the public pressure intensified alongside it. Wilde faced the same charge, but now the prosecution aimed for certainty, not debate. This time, every detail carried heavier weight because the system had already been tested once. The legal strategy changed, and it changed the balance of power. The case relied less on Wilde's wit and explanations, and more on pinning down actions and contacts as proof of gross indecency. The prosecution tightened its presentation, selecting points that landed with a jury primed to condemn. The defense had less room to maneuver, and each attempt to reframe the evidence seemed to confirm suspicion instead of weakening it. The verdict no longer hung in the air. Wilde was convicted, and the court moved quickly to punishment. The sentence was blunt and severe. 2 years hard labour. It meant not just imprisonment, but a deliberate regime designed to break routine, body, and will. In that moment, the law did more than declare him guilty. It sealed his public ruin and turned a legal defeat into a controlled, grinding ordeal. The sentence did not end in court. It began again inside prison. Wilde entered a system built to grind people down through routine, silence, and hard labour. The days followed strict rules that left little room for thought, let alone comfort. He faced long stretches alone, cut off from friends and from the life that had defined him. The isolation did not merely punish him, it reshaped him. The pressure showed in his body. Hard labour weakened him, and the prison diet and medical neglect left him vulnerable. He grew tired, then worn, then ill. But the deeper damage came from enforced separation and the constant message that he deserved to be broken. His confidence drained away. His public persona, once quick and fearless, had no use there. In prison, survival replaced performance. Yet even under restriction, he wrote, given limited conditions and watched closely, he produced a long letter that later became known as De Profundis. It did not sound like the Wilde the world remembered. It carried grief, blame, and a harsh kind of self-examination. He traced what he lost and what the punishment demanded of him. The voice that emerged was slower and wounded, shaped by suffering rather than applause. When Oscar Wilde left prison in 1897, he did not return to the life he had known. England remained too hostile, and his name still carried the stain of his conviction. He went to the continent and lived as an exile, moving from place to place, kept afloat by small allowances and the fading loyalty of friends. Freedom arrived, but it came with a price. His body had not recovered. The punishment followed him into the ordinary details of life. Work became harder, money stayed tight, and his health kept slipping. Yet the experience in prison did not stay locked away as a private wound. Wilde turned back to writing, not to charm society, but to confront it. He began shaping a poem that treated prison as a system, not a single tragedy, and it pressed blame outward toward the state. That poem became the Ballad of Reading Gaol, named for the prison where he had watched suffering become routine. He wrote about what hard labour and isolation did to men, and how easy it was for institutions to crush them without remorse. It sounded like a public reckoning, not a plea for sympathy. Wilde still declined, physically and financially, but the work carried his accusation beyond exile. The system had broken him, and he recorded it. In the years after his death, Oscar Wilde's story did not stay frozen in the shame that followed him out of court. His work kept circulating. New readers kept finding it, not as scandal, but as literature that still landed, sharp, funny, and unsettling. Over time, the public memory shifted. The man, once reduced to a charge, became, again, an author people quoted, studied, and carried with them. That change mattered because it exposed what the trials had really done. In 1895, the law and the press treated Wilde's style, his friendships, and his private life as if they proved guilt on their own. It was not just behaviour that got punished. It was a kind of person. Later generations looked back and saw the mechanism clearly. Brilliance turned into suspicion, and identity turned into evidence. By the modern era, Wilde stood in a different role. He was remembered as a major voice in English writing, and also as a symbol in queer history, tied to a long fight against laws that criminalized people for who they loved. The same facts once used to destroy him became part of why he endured. The contrast stayed stark. The injustice once denied became the point.